in after 9 hours of driving. That would probably be a
Yeah,
bad start to beat.
I will let them know.
Yeah, I'll sign up. Actually, I have a profile with you guys now, so they could just charge me or whatever.
Yeah, don't worry. I'm gonna let them. Like we can bring a friend every month. I think that's it, right? So I
I'll
can
be
say,
somebody's
hey,
friend.
yeah,
I still have to use mine, so you're in, Nate.
Perfect.
yeah,
Perfect. All right, guys. Let's kick off with the damper stuff and the rower conversation.
right.
Um, we had a bunch of members going up to her asking her about the damper setting, and then I got to the gym later on that day, and it was like the same conversation. Everyone kept asking me, "What do I row on?" So it kind of made me realize that it's not a subject I think many members have even the slightest clue on. So I want to go over it with you guys. That way, when you set somebody up, you can kind of explain the whys behind it too, and just have that so it makes a little more sense. So I sent that little video that he went over it, and he had some really good points in it. And I just kind of want to build on that video that was in the app. Did you guys have any takeaways or questions on what the guy at Dark Horse was explaining? And I'll kind of still go through it.
I guess what
Um,
made me understand, sorry, what made me understand it a little bit better was him like having us imagine if we were underwater trying to row.
That would slow the fan down and be harder to
Yeah,
pull.
that's what at least made it click for me.
I think that's a really good way, I think, to explain the higher damper to somebody.
Right.
That would just make it instantly understandable.
Right. And that it's like slower to come back as well. Or
I
wait,
want to get into the timing of it because he talked about the timing depending what kind of athlete you were, but he didn't talk about the timing of the fan wheel that I want to expand upon. So we'll get into that because I think that's a really important point. It's like kind of this thing from multiple angles. Justin, what were you gonna say?
um, oh, this was like really eye-opening. A lot of this stuff was really new to me, and I've done a fair amount of research on understanding row and how to align the body, like 11-1, like some of that kind of stuff. But I was, and he kind of hinted to it. Like I was under the impression that if you're bigger, you would want to take it up to a 10, and he's like, no, other way around. So that was one thing that I was like, okay, that's. But
Opposite.
yeah, something I didn't get here that I wanted to ask you about is like, but when would you want to change the damper based on a type of workout, like a shorter workout, longer workout, like 250 versus like 2000 meters? Like, would that change the damper level?
Let's go. Let's go through it because I want to expand upon some of what he said, and then we'll kind of come back to that. Like in the end, we'll put like the icing on the cake with that finally. So just like a really quick review on the damper. We've got, it could be the same thing for a skier. We've got 1 through 10 on the side of the rower. Higher we put that lever, the more air is going to be allowed to go into that fan, into that wheel, the fan wheel. And by having more air in, makes it a more tense stroke, a little bit of a heavier pull when we're actually rowing. But then also having more air in is also going to slow it down faster. So when we do have that row stroke, that fan's going to slow down a lot quicker than if we have a lower level. Versus if it's lower, we're cutting off the air supply. When we go to pull, it's a much lighter pull because we have no resistance, like he was saying. You can imagine it underwater, the higher it is. So we're taking away that resistance. That fan wheel spins a lot faster and it spins a lot longer, right? So he got very into like the types of athletes that it is. And like Justin, you were saying, you were thinking, just bigger type, stronger athletes should just jack it up, which is, I think, an equation to it, but not everything. So if you have the very explosive, fast athlete, he recommended rowing on a lower setting, right? And he talked about being able to get the pull in the catch. Did you guys understand what he meant by that? because the flywheel is on because there's less air and you're rowing on like a low setting, that flywheel is going faster. So when that athlete has to come forward and they're getting ready to turn around and their catch and start the stroke again, they have to be a lot quicker and more explosive to catch up to the speed of that already moving wheel to give more energy. Versus if you guys ever ride a bike and you put like the gear all the way on one, and all of a sudden it gets really, really easy and you have to pedal like extremely fast to catch up to the gears. It's like the same concept, right? So you need to be a very quick athlete for that. So that's what he was talking about, that fast, quick athletes do better lower usually. Versus the slow twitch endurance athletes, which is the opposite of what Justin was saying, usually do better higher. And the only reason they do better higher is because there's more air, so that wheel has gotten to a slower point. So when they go to turn around, because their turnaround explosion isn't as fast, they're able to get instant tension on the chain. So really it's about getting tension against that fan wheel and re-speeding it back up. Where can you find the tension immediately versus having maybe a quarter of your stroke without tension there? So does that make sense to you, what he was talking about in that video? Cool. I'm gonna take that as a yeah. Here's what he didn't talk about that I want to expand upon.
Oh, Nathan, one thing. So if it is at the lower setting at 1, you would just have to pull more strokes per minute in order to get yourself caught up into that timing.
Not necessarily more strokes per minute, but each stroke is going to have to be a lot. Not your strokes per minute being fast, but your actual stroke being faster. That's the part that has to get quicker.
It has to be
Okay.
more aggressive, like you have
It
to
has to-
push more aggressively.
Okay.
Yeah, and you literally have to have more speed in the stroke. Versus you could instantly have tension without any speed if you were rowing on like a 10. It'd be like almost restarting the row every time. What he didn't talk about that I think more as CrossFitters we can utilize and how it can be so different for each person is we take a row stroke and that fan takes off and it's going fast, right? And then that fan starts to slow down. What we're trying to do is get a timing element there as well. So we have the stroke, the fan takes off, and then it's starting to slow, and we recatch it right in the slow down and have another pull. Versus if it's still going full speed and we retry to catch it, we're gonna have to do what that like fast twitch is gonna do and have a really, really aggressive stroke. Or if it's like a 10 and I have my row stroke and I take my sweet time and I'm kind of recovering, but it takes me too long to get back to the front. Now it's slowed down too much that I'm almost like restarting my row again. So as like a CrossFitter, we're trying to take the row and make it this recovery, when it's paired with other movements. So I want to be able to have a rest period. So I want to be able to stroke it where I'm comfortable, recover, that fan wheel starting to slow, and then I get another pull. Does that make sense to you guys so far?
So when it's on a lower setting, you don't have to rush to the catch position. It's
So
like
if
a slower coming back, a slower recovery than when it's on a 10, then you have to come quicker.
You'd have to come back a little quicker for that. So like that was like literally my next. So like when you're looking at the row, the lower we are, the more I'm going to be able to take some time coming back. And that fan is going to start to slow at the timing I'm getting there, right? And then you see how that kind of mimics if I have an Olympic weightlifting athlete, they do one heavy lift, they drop it, they rest, they come again. My row is one really aggressive stroke. I take more time coming back before I do it again. Versus if it's on a 10, I'm going to pull, that fan wheel is going to slow faster. So I got to get back to the front faster to pull again. And how my strokes per minute are going to jump. And I'm going to have to do more actual pulls in the minute than I would on a lower setting. So what does that mimic? More of an endurance athlete. They're just doing more work continuously at a rate versus pull, take your time, pull. That's why, like, for if someone just asks me, you don't really know the answer to what they should have the damper just set on unless they did a little bit of a test and a little bit of an experiment. I put that in the app. So if you guys want to take a look, it takes you about an hour. It's a really long time because you want to have a lot of rest. So you're like the same person on each interval, basically. Girls, 3 to 5, guys, usually 4 to 6 is like the zone, somewhere in the middle. But does that kind of make sense to you guys? So we're taking this from multiple angles. Like the higher it is, the harder the pull is going to be. That can affect somebody. The more they're probably going to also have to stroke. The lower it is, the more of a fast twitch, explosive athlete they need to be. So like the answer is not dropping it all the way down. We have to find this like happy medium for people to be the most efficient as possible. We kind of, being CrossFitters, take the best of all of those worlds and put it somewhere. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah, that makes sense. Like it makes it feel like easier to explain now. Cause all these, like I have so many athletes that I'm using a 7, I'm using an 8 and a 10 and all that shit. And I'm like I don't understand. Like I get that it's harder to pull, but now that I know that like you gotta come back faster because if not, it's like you're starting from zero again. That makes it just easier for me to explain.
And I think when you see somebody just like on a 10 or just like on a 1, you know that's the wrong answer most likely. Like when we start to get into the middle, like a 7, like my best, like when I do a damper test, my best is like a 6.5, 7. But when I'm in a workout rowing, I don't like the feel of it. I like a little less tension. So like I think over time, like discovering yourself too is an important piece. But like when they're in that zone, it's hard to really just tell because how much power is somebody putting out in the stroke? How explosive are they in that stroke? How long are they going to individually take to also get back to the front? Like I'm a very slow rower. I'm like a 20 to 22 stroke a minute person. So I do a really, really aggressive pull, but I take my sweet time to come back. Like knowing that I'm going to row out like a 3 or a 4 because I want that thing to be spinning longer. Versus, who's a good example? Mike that used to get on the call. He's a lot faster than me coming up, but he probably puts out like about the same power. He rows on like a 5 or a 6. And it's like we're going at the same speed, but those 2 different settings are allowing us to move differently on the rower. So like that comes into play too. Like as a coach, watching how somebody rows, what their cadence is, those things can help you also match up and just listening. Like listen to what that fan is doing. Did it totally get quiet? Or is it still fully going when they're starting to pull again? Like, and you can kind of literally take the fan wheel as they go and listen and hear what's happening with it and also look at their metrics and you can kind of gauge it with just that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say like the biggest thing for us is like CrossFit coaches, CrossFitters is like just what we do. We're trying to be good at everything. We're not trying to be a specialist in anything. So look at the ends of the damper as like the specialist ends. We're good, so we're trying to be middle ground. Is where most of it are gonna live. Anything else you guys want to add on that? And obviously, like, go ahead, Jose, and then I'll say my last point.
I want to say what happened with this workout on me. I had an amazing performance, like something unblocked in this one. When I was like reviewing it, I wanted to do it on Thursday, and I got there. Okay, this is 20 minutes. My 5K on row, it's 21 something. So I know that I should have my pace as a 5K. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna hold it at 2 minutes. But then I started in Shy. I'm gonna say that Shy is like a genius on competition. He's like, he looks at you and he's like, okay, no, you're doing this wrong, do this, do that, and he can like kind of like read you already. And he knows like when you are going to break and he can push and like beat you. Like he's kind of like that. So he looked at me doing 2 rounds and he said, okay, no, even if you're going slow on that one, it's too fast for this workout. And we decided to do in a pace in 500 meters in 2:04 and holding that for the two for all the time. So the thing is that when it's like, let's say a workout that it's 200 meters and then you rest or do something that is compensation, I would go in 145 or 150 rowing. But if it's something for cruising, like more than like a K, 1K or something, I would go like over the 2 minutes. And I would do it like you, like holding, breathing.
Take your time. You make it more of a recovery than
Yeah. You're
something
like
you're
two,
gonna
like
win.
1 second and then take two and recovering. Yeah. This workout, I did every round in 2 minutes, 20 seconds, like every time. And I kept myself uncomfortable during the whole 20 minutes. Like that threshold that you're like it's uncomfortable but doable, but all the time I
Hair too
felt,
fast, you're in trouble. Hair too slow, you're in trouble.
I did
yeah,
the same thing.
I am like it's like I'm like I've been doing CrossFit for a long time and this is the first time that I felt like this, like uncomfortable and doable during the whole time. And I ended up doing the 8 rounds that I thought I wasn't going to do it, but
But I
the
score.
point is that it's like how's or the point that I want to make is like even okay, you already know what's your damper that you already go. Like mine is in between 6 and 7. But now in that one, how fast you can push for different types of workout. In this one,
Different reasons.
in this one I was thinking as a 5K. Even go slow than a 5K for the workout. And in others I really push like more than that. The one thing that I had in mind, but I never did it because I was already out of my mind at the end. I was going to put the damper in 10 and pull the last one, but I was like, I wasn't even thinking at the last minute of that work. So
So if you think of like what we know about energy systems and like what's happening physiologically, when you're at that 19-minute mark, do you have a lot of the phosphocreatine energy left? No. And that's like the fast twitch explosive. Like you're at minute 20, you're rocking a little bit of glycogen and you're getting into that aerobic and like burning fat. So you really don't have a lot of like explosive stuff left in you. So like in that case, putting that, if you would have notched it up, would have made sense because your turnarounds and your explosions would be a lot slower. So that would have been good. I would say pretty good thinking. Something you made me think of that I think's super worth it to share. Ben Bergeron used to talk about rowing in competitions, and he was like, don't ever try to win the rower. Like the person that usually gets off that first usually isn't going to survive because they may have gained 5 to 10 seconds on you, but put everything else at a detriment because of that. Versus if you row, if Jose's rowing a 2 and I row a 2:05 and I'm putting in a lot less effort than his 2, when we get on, if you look at like this open wall, what do we have in there? We have double unders. Like those dubs could have gotten weird because someone rode a little too fast.
And Nathan, let me add to that. So to that comment, I was watching Noah Olson talking about rowing at 145 versus a 155 and how that would change the total time allocation. Basically, it saves 30 seconds.
Not
It's
a
like
ton.
2 seconds per round or something like that. Yeah, I'm like, oh, that's not a ton.
Over a 20-minute workout. So imagine if you took a 12-minute workout, what our average, time domain is going to be. What's it end up being? 15 seconds. That's one chalk break. That's one trip potentially. Like it really doesn't give you so much of a bigger gap, but it takes a lot more energy.
So that
Yeah,
makes me think about the other thing that why everyone is like high level athletes are complaining about this one because there's no much difference like with me between the people that are like very good in my country that I was like looking, it was like it's just a few reps difference for very well experienced. Like it was not much difference.
So I have a really good friend that I'm up here with, and he was not like 9.5 rounds. He was shy of 10, and he repeated it last night. And in the repeat, his we were a little bit at odds about what the strategy should be. He thought he should row a little bit harder. I thought he should just be more concentrated on the deadlift because he had some break. He had 3 rounds when he did it last time that the breaks were weird. He decided to go with his strategy and row harder. And you know what ended up happening? He ended up
Yeah.
tripping like 7 times or 8 times on his double unders. And he's someone that never trips on their double unders. And what those trips ended up being, even though he rode 10 seconds faster on his split times, he got one more rep than Friday night. Which I think if he would have slowed the row, never tripped, I think it would have been like potentially finishing the row and finishing the deadlifts of that round, like a much bigger gap. So
I
I do
think
think it's a good takeaway that like you can't win a workout on a row unless the workout is solely row, like a 2K, like Justin was saying.
Yeah, and I think that WOD was so good for that. I think it taught a lot of people that lesson because even at my gym, I told all of my athletes to not rush the row, to find a pace and stick to that pace the entire time. A lot of them, some of them did what I said and they did fantastic. And the other ones that didn't, then afterwards they were like, I should have done what you said. And then they
Just-
repeated it. They
it
did what I
literally-
said and they were like, you were right.
much
I got a
easier.
whole round more.
It just literally became a game of losing the workout on the row and being able to move on those other two movements off the row.
Yep.
So I do think like the moral of all this, like when we talk about the damper setting, how to find that, you know, things like that, and like the pacing we're talking about here is taking the row and really making it like I say recovery loosely, but a recovery piece, like being very smart, very efficient on it versus being not is a massive gap and can be very detrimental for people to move on. And to Justin's point, we talk about all of this. If your rowing technique is still very off, you're still in a shitload of trouble.
Yeah.
So like all that work you put in on like that stuff, Justin, is still equally as valuable, you know, as like setting up and things like that too, like on the damper.
There's one thing that I did on this workout that I forgot where I saw it, but it was like the perfect thing for me because I have sensitive back and doing all those deadlifts. I was like, this is gonna be a bitch on the row.
Oh,
Is
hinge.
I did less hinging. I think we may have talked about this. I did more of a squat, so I didn't go as far down, and I also didn't let my shoulders come as far forward. I kept them pulled back more. And because it wasn't that, I mean, I was holding around like a 210, 215 is in that range. Because it wasn't that hard of a row, I was able to have that compromise or different kind of row alignment, and it saved my back.
So I do agree with you a lot there. Like when we look at row technique, like getting it perfect, like where did that come from? That came from people who are getting on actual rowboats and they're racing and they're staying on a rower the entire time. That is their sport. That is their event. They weren't getting off the rower and doing more deadlifts or doing more squats and things like that. Like our sport starts to get a little bit different. So I think generally, if we're keeping the sequencing the same, so it's like the legs drive, the hip drives, the arm drives, and that sequence is there, but we're slightly tweaking and we're not maybe hinging as much as we normally do. Like you were saying, you made it a hair more squatty. I do think that stuff is okay. Like on my row, I don't know if this was a mistake or not. I intentionally pulled a little extra arms than I did like my hinge and drive there because I was thinking the same thing. Like I have back issues in the row workouts. I'm trying to preserve that as long as possible. I don't know if it was a good idea because my dubs got real weird in the end because my arms were smoked. So I don't know if it was a good thing, but those little like I'll call them deviations and tweaks to make based on what else you have in the workout can be a very smart thing. The games event last year, I think it was last year. It was rowing. It was like rowing box jumps, burpee box jumps, and then it like repeated and came the other way. If you listen to a lot of the athletes' interviews, they started to be really, really hip hit and try to get out of their quads because they knew all those box jump overs with that. So like as a strategy, preserving that, you know, as well. So I do think that was a pretty smart move, Justin. As long as we're not butchering, is what I would say. That's what we have to be careful with. And we know we've seen those rows that are just weird. Anything else you guys want to add on that stuff? I
I'm gonna go
recommend-
down today and look the other way, how to set the damper, how to find your setting, you know, the one that it's inside there. I'm gonna record it.
the drag factor
The
one.
drag factor, yeah.
That's where you can start to play with. I think I put a note in the app. You can start to play with like the damper you think you're at and start to like fine tune that a little bit to make
Mhm.
sure that you're getting tension on the stroke. I'll try to find a drag factor video to put as well. So you guys, if you don't know what Jose's talking about, you can play with that too. That's like the quicker way, I think, of finding damper for people than to do that whole real damper test. And then the problem is too, is like if a rower's super clean, super dirty, has new bands, you know, all of these factors, which every rower in our gym is different than the next, and then we go to another gym and it's different. That's all going to change the drag factors too. So like sometimes getting on rowers and like you're going to do it, like you're about to do a workout, and if it's a workout you care about, play with it a little bit. Starts to feel where you're timing and listen. And don't be so set of like, I just always do 5. Let yourself have some wiggle room there because of those factors too. Anything else on the row? I'm gonna share my screen. Can you guys see my screen? I'm gonna pull up those sheets I sent y'all. Janae, I think you got in the app right after I sent message with these sheets. But they're still on Monday. You can still pull them up. So just in case. So I didn't make these sheets from scratch. Just throwing that out there. This is like from CrossFit. I did add a couple like scaling things on a few of them. Just to have a little bit more ammo, but these are like the actual terms that they were using for some of this stuff. And I thought it would be a good way to pair some of like the mobility and like root causes of the squats, because we've been talking about mobility and flexibility, starting to pair and be like, okay, that could be this kind of problem, to give you guys more ammo on just, you know, correcting folks, maybe getting into more like deeper problems people may have. With these sheets, I think CrossFit calls them the cheat sheets. They are literally that. So like when we talk about like making our, you know, our teaching plans and our lesson plans, like if I've got the air squat, like we've talked about, when the first thing you're going to do is your setup, you're going to go hands, feet, body weights. It gives you hands, feet, body weights. Like you're the air squats in the hands, but that it also, between the execution and the points of performance, those are going to be your progression and those are going to be your layering points, right? So we can just take each of these, implement them. So when you guys are planning, if you have a movement that you kind of get to, and it's like the shoulder press, because that one's always a weird one for me. And I'm like, okay, well, I know straight bar path and I know setup. What else could I add in here? Pull that cheat sheet up. I'll get that made and sent to you guys for trust next. Pull that up, so then that gives you more actions to actually teach and go through, like when you're doing class. Does that make sense to you guys? Cool. You literally use it as that. Literally cheat off of it. Some of the faults. This is kind of where I want to relay some of the mobility, like flexibility stuff happening with people. On today in the app on Tuesday, there's a few videos, there's a couple ankles, there's a couple hip ones in there as well about like internal and external hip rotation. And And that's what I really want to put focus on because it also answered some of the stuff we talked about before with the butler. So we talked about our correcting and our faults. We talked about improper line of action, right? That was the butt going back and down. What does that typically cause for people fault wise? Besides that one.
Oh, line of action?
Yeah.
Wait, what was
Like
your question?
what other fault is usually going to happen when that happens?
Oh, the muted hip? No? Which
Think of fault to your air squat.
Heels up.
yeah,
Yeah, your heels comes up. You were thinking like too hard about the hip region.
yeah.
So your heels come up. So we know those are correct, connected. Loss of neutral spine. So someone's squatting and they have that flexion, like actual back is flexion. What can be some of the reasons that's happening? There's a whole shitload of answers on this,
Not keeping their core tight, engaged.
right? The core not staying engaged. Let's start and let's think about that one. Why could that happen to somebody?
Not breathing and bracing.
Yeah, they could just be straight up like not concentrating on it, or like they start their brace, right? And then they start to move and they lose it. Why would they lose it? What issue would that be with them? Be a neurological issue, right? They may not have like
Yeah.
the brain to connection to be able to hold that brace the entire way through the squat. That can just purely be a practice one, like repetitions on that, rebracing at the top, redoing it and trying to fight it can be very helpful. I think giving them a target on that so they're not going quite as low, so you're just centralizing the movement could be a good one. Have you ever seen the quadruped rocks? So it's kind of like you're on all fours. You're kind of in like, the frog stretch when you open up your knees, it's kind of like a child's pose and you just sit back. It's kind of like doing like that stretch. And what the athlete would do is they would rock forward, they would take a breath in, they would make their belly tight, and then they would rock backwards. The rock backwards is them going deeper into their squat. There's no load. They don't have to think about any other points of performances. So it just starts to make it an easier concentration as far as like brain to muscle connection on how to keep that core engaged the whole time while the hips and the knees are going into flexion. So that could be a really good neurological one as well. Hanging on to the rig, just sitting in a deep squat and focusing on breathing, focusing on bracing can be really good. The rig's assisting them. So the neurological aspect could be, a loss of neutral spine. What's another one?
Another
Lack of
one.
ankle mobility.
Yeah, lack of flexibility, or like mobility, right? If we've got someone with just extremely tight hamstrings and they go into the squat and it starts to pull and it pulls the entire pelvis under and the hip now is following the femurs, like we're gonna have flexion in the back, right? So having things tight that are pulling or doing work are gonna be an issue. And then what's one more easy one here? It'd just be a lack of core strength, right? Like, I know, like for us to think of an air squat and like the race of four is like not a big deal, but we do get people that come into our gym that we take our strength for granted, and it is a challenging thing for them. Doing the movements, focusing on it, and obviously CrossFit is a core strength and conditioning program that's going to improve over time. There. Questions on that? Here's where it gets even more nerdy and more interesting. Knees collapsing. Give me a root cause for that.
Just maybe their hip flexion, but like
Like the
they have
engagement.
tight hips,
Yeah,
perhaps.
tight hips. Tight hips can be one of them. Specifically, this is where it gets in my opinion, super, super interesting. So when we start our squat, right, and I'm standing tall and I start to go into the squat, what are my glutes doing for the knees, right? They're activating, they're pulling them out. So the engagement from my glutes are what's going to keep my knee driving out and staying in line. So we have an external rotation of the hip in the start of the squat. As we descend deeper, so you get someone like me, I'm a perfect example of this. My knees are great to start. I have good glute engagement. As I go deeper, you start to see this collapse in happening. So what happens is the hip starts to like butterfly out and the femur starts to like internally rotate with that butterfly. So you also get an internal rotation that happens toward the bottom of the squat, like that 90-degree and under mark. And if the person doesn't have internal rotation of the hip either, the knees will collapse in. In today's app, the third video down, it's a super jargony, like kind of nerdy video. He explains it extremely well. The two videos above that are Kelly Starrett and Dr. Horshig, that they're going over some like mobility and corrective stuff for it. So both of those are in that. So you need external and internal hip rotation. That could be a problem with the knees collapsing in. What's another one? I kind of said it in that answer.
The glute engagement,
Glutes,
or like
yeah,
glutes.
weak glutes, if they're not firing, knees will collapse in there as well. And we can still always go back to like that neurological point. Maybe the person just needs to practice it more as well.
But I think also important is indicating which glute. So the external rotators is going to be the glute medius. And we think of training glutes, we don't often think of the glute med as much, which is going to be more like the clamshell kind of
the rotating
activation, not just like squatting alone. So for me, this is something I have been focusing more on. So I'll either do like cable abduction or just I've been doing a lot more clamshells.
You know what I find too? Like if I do a like a banded warm up and I put like some bands around my knees and I do like side shuffles and cowboy walks and all of those things like clamshells, my right glute is like on fire immediately. Like a couple sets in, it's burning, and my left glute, I'll feel nothing. And it's literally just a factor of like my right is on and it's working, and my left's not turning on, or it takes longer to turn on. So a lot of times I find it like personally when I do that stuff, and I have to stop and actually do like left only, and I'll hold on to a rig and I'll manipulate the knee in and out so I can focus on only that one to get it going. And then once I get it going, it's fine. But it takes like additional 2 or 3 sets for me to actually get the left going and on. So that's a good point, like finding which one's not cooperating as well. I think back to the internal hip thing, I think is a very, very fast overlooked thing that a lot of people have that we don't address very well. And we put them in like a pigeon pose and we go external, 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 because we're always thinking of the knee has to go out, not realizing that internal is as important, especially in the depths of squat. In the video, he also addresses like a power lifter that's more hingy, that it's not really the same for them as it is for someone that's squatting very upright, which is us, which is CrossFitted. Not going low enough, or I think it also goes a lot hand in hand with like an immature squat when they squat and they bow way over. I think all of the stuff we just talked about can be that. What's a really good drill for immature squat? Or let's go immature squat first, and then you can add it to depth. We see it all the time.
So
at level ones.
the wall squat, the squat therapy.
Squat therapy. So putting somebody on a wall with that, a great tactile cue to fix the immature squat. Adding a med ball target, you can address both of those things at the same time. For someone like me, that I have no problem bending over. I think hinging is a little bit easier than staying upright. putting me on a wall with my issue of like internal hip rotation being very, very tight. I virtually have none. It's like a dumpster fire. Like I can't push my knees out and stay tall at the same time. Things start to collapse. So I think like using that drill is so good, but also addressing like what is actually going on besides those two things can be really important too. So that drill solely, I don't know that is like by itself beneficial for me. Working on the internal rotation and that drill is more beneficial for someone that just is a shit show like I am. Weight shifted into the toes. We talked about it earlier. That could be a line of action problem while the person's going forward. That could also be, they're just not aware. They're not feeling it. And then what's the other thing that happens that we see the heel start to peel off? Another
Right.
fault on this list.
Oh,
Like, think about the faults. The knees. A lot of times if those knees peel in, if you look at the heel, like they're not like directly all the way into the toes, but that whole like outside back heel comes off the ground. And a lot of times it's just like the inside of the heel. So sometimes you see the knees going hand in hand with what's happening with like the weight shift for toes too. Any questions on some of these faults and why some of them could occur as far as like issues, but specifically like flexibility and mobility?
so what would you do in your case then if the wall, if you collapse on the wall squat? Like what would you do to help your internal rotation? The bands? Like what would you do?
There's a couple videos I put in the app that I think look like pretty good drills. So take a look at those. One of them is like a banded distraction that I really like because I can be a little bit more like passive in it. Something that I've come across the day I pulled these videos up, I probably watched like 3 hours of stuff. And one common theme that just repeatedly is over and over and over is mobilizing and moving in the positions that we're going to be doing the exercises in. Kelly Starrett had a great point. He was talking about like when people lay on the floor and they do like that quad stretch and they kind of put like a leg behind them. He was like, yeah, that it's internal rotation. But the problem is it doesn't hit internal rotation with a flexed hip. When we squat, we need to have that with a flexed hip. And part of the problem that people run into are they stretch it, but it's not in the position that we're about to use for the exercise. So a lot of these issues that happen, I think if we can find mobilizations that are in the position that we want to be in, the better. And I think that's why you see a lot of people give like eccentric training as mobilizing training, because if you're doing an eccentric overhead squat to improve your overhead squat flexibility, like you're in that position. Versus if I just do a lot of PVC pass-throughs to get my shoulders loosened up, I don't have a flexed hip and a flexed knee in my PVC pass-through, so it's not exactly the same when it comes to shoulders. The immature squat, like having tight ankles, right, and not having ankle flexibility would make people bend over. So it's like if you watch Squat University, he has them do a banded distraction, and they've got a hip and the knee flex in the banded distraction. And then he has them get in a squat on the rig and rotate to the ankle that he needs to be in. Like he puts them in that mimicking position. And then he also talks about like tibial rotation too, like the knee doesn't go forward, it actually needs to go to the outside of the toes for like a proper squat mechanic too. So finding positions that you're going to be able to access it that mimic what you're doing, I would say is going to be the most important. So I think for me that I have multiple faults, having multiple things that I'm working on. So I'm not solely doing squat therapy on the wall. I'm also accessing and trying to improve that range of motion in my hip, and then also pairing it maybe the same day with a squat therapy. So I'm doing two things at once, like not just eggs in one basket type stuff. Any questions or other statements on that? Cool. Some of the scaling that they put, I know when I'm looking at like lesson plans and just stuff like this, like I almost breeze past scaling because I'm like, I'm good at that. I know how to scale people and I don't think twice about it, but I do want to pull and just like say one point. They talk about, squatting to a target or a box. And they have this little like asterisk that's like to use loads that are going to always allow full range of motion. I think that's something that's heavily looked for. When we talk about gaining strength or healthy joints, having those full range of motions are going to be more important than being able to do partial range of motions with like heavy load. So if you look at something like, that I'm doing and I'm evaluating for level 4, they would rather somebody do a barbell back squat and hit depth than for me to allow them load and do a box squat. So I think always prioritize range of motion in your scaling. And then when it comes to like, let's say I have somebody with a hip issue and we're doing squats that day and the squat bothers them, I'm only going to change the squat when they can't do a pain-free, and they also maybe couldn't do a target pain-free. Because if they're squatting to a target, I'm at least preserving the squat a little bit. But if we've got neither, then I can at least just go to low body. I can preserve the low body and then have them go to a lunge. So always think of like, what's the point? What's the movement function? Can I preserve that? And then if not, then you go to those plan Bs and plan Cs. Don't just skip directly to plan C though.
So, but when you squat to the target or, to the box, you put it to where they can do the full range of motion. Or no, or it depends.
It depends. So like, if it's an injury standpoint, I'm gonna put it to where they can pain-free do
Yeah.
their range of motion. If it's a neurological standpoint where they're just like they don't really know where they're at and they have
Okay.
one that's a good depth, they have one that's shallow, then I'm going to put it to a full depth because they need to learn where breaking parallel is. So it's a big it depends on that one. With the goal being to always get everybody to that full range of motion at some point in time, whether it's neurological or this injury.
Okay.
Do you guys remember the days where everyone used to do Fran to a med ball? That's like OG shit. Everybody used to do Fran to a med ball because the thing was like shallow reps, so everyone would put a med ball out so they couldn't get called out. Kind of funny to think about it now.
The squats and what's the girls, the nasty girls.
Oh, yeah, that's right. They go to a med ball. They're like hammering that thing. They definitely didn't need it, I would say. Any questions on any of this stuff? Go through these, play with them. There's a back squat one in there, which I think is great because like we don't often see when they talk about setup of the back squat. So it gives you light on that. I know you were reading a very long back squat article. Here's a nice little summary of that, I would say. That thing's like 100 pages. So use that stuff. One more thing I want to talk about before we call it today a day. We had a conversation a while ago, and I think it came up last week in our movement of the difference of like a butt wink and a loss of neutral spine and like a bend of the actual spine. And we looked at, I think it was Justin's video, and you see movement in his pelvis, but when you watch only the lower back, he maintains the S curve through that whole back squat that he did. In today's app, that third video, there's a part that he's going to talk about when you squat and you start to get to a lower depth and the pelvis kind of opens up a little bit, and then that's when the internal rotation happens. He does not say it's a butt wink, but that's what we were talking about and what we were seeing, and that I couldn't find the information on. It's that movement that you see people's pelvis have this little shift that is not a loss of neutral spine. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So
this kind of
finally found the answer accidentally, basically.
This was really interesting for me because you already mentioned it before that we go from external to internal, but at that butt wink, and maybe just before the butt wink, we go back into external again. And I'm thinking about it in my own squats and visualizing how it looks. And that's how it goes. I start driving my knees out like being coached, and then all of a sudden they start wanting to come in, and then I get down to the depth and they open right back up again.
It's easy to open again.
Yeah, and then I get ready to stand, they kind of come in, and then I stand all the way tall.
And it's interesting because like when you guys go watch that video, I think it's like 6 minutes. It's pretty short. He actually talks about like 60 to 90 degrees, or he goes, or your sticking point is where it's going to happen, and that's exactly where you're describing it as well.
Yeah, Tia and Brooke Wells, that when they squat,
Oh,
their
they're
knees
bad.
touch, and then it's wild.
Theirs is wild. Theirs is a bit extreme, I would say. But if you don't watch anything else, that little, it's not an exciting video, but like if you can start to connect dots, like it is an exciting video. That little bit of like, I think he calls it oscillation in the hip, that's the butt weak we see. That is not the loss of lumbar spine. And then the more content you guys start to see on like Instagram and YouTube and all these things, and there's coaches that are calling the butt wink and they're saying it's a loss of neutral spine, you kind of realize that they don't realize that there is a shift in there, that those are two different things that happen. So just, I think it's something that worth being educated about. And the last thing I want to say is don't let that be an excuse when you guys watch athletes. Like, be honest with yourself as a coach. Is there movement in the lower back? Or is it just like how we look at Justin's video with that little bit of shift? I'll pull that video back up Thursday so we can retake a glance at it as well. I was super excited about that. I was having a breakthrough moment in Starbucks. Anything you guys want to throw on today? Questions, comments? We're all instantly better rowers. All right, I will see you guys on Thursday then. Send some videos if you got them. Oh, Janae, real quick before you go, can you shoot me over your phone number so I can put you in our WhatsApp group?
Okay.
Perfect, thanks. All right, I'll see you guys on Thursday.